And joining us now, Rhode Island Democrat Senator Jack Reed. You heard Senator McCain call Benghazi and those emails a cover-up.
Absolutely not. The Congress has already had 11 hearings on the topic. Over 25,000 pieces of documentation have been provided to Congress. In fact, the emails in question, I believe, were available in February in the context of the John Brennan confirmation hearing. And more critically, I think, is that two of the most respected Americans, Ambassador Thomas Pickering and former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mike Mullen, conducted a thorough report assessing.
They did not look at those emails. And in fact, Thomas Pickering told ABC News you have to be totally naive to not believe politics was injected in some role.
Well, I think what I would suggest in looking at the play-by-play is what was going on was not so much the politics of electioneering, but the institutional sort of positioning. Victoria Nuland, who was representing the State Department, had a long career in public service. She's not a partisan. In fact, she worked for Dick Cheney. She was, I think, very much interested in making sure that the State Department's position and their
so you're saying this is an interagency
I think
problem.
This was a classic issue of the interagency's battle about who will say what. And at the end, I think what you had was a very sort of consensus document that avoided all of the difficult issues.
So but it's acceptable for Jay Carney to originally say there was just one small change in this, and then we find these 12 different versions, including a very definitive statement. We do know that Islamic extremists with ties to al-Qaeda participated in the attack. That did not appear in there. That's acceptable to take that
That did
out?
not appear in the talking points, but I recall when Ambassador Rice was being interviewed on one of the TV shows, she essentially said there were extremist elements. She did not contradict that. The president's, I think, statement immediately after the events, I think a day after the events, was this was an act of terror. So there's no attempt, as I think my colleague on the side is suggesting, that there was a story being created, that there was no terrorist involvement, that terrorism was not at all at issue. I think what was being debated, and seriously, again, just a month ago, Jim Clapper, the head of the intelligence community in the United States, said, based on his view as a professional over these years, those comments were about as fair and as accurate as you could get.
Let me go back to that act of terror that you say President Obama talked about the next day in the Rose Garden and that Senator McCain disputed. If the president said it was an act of terror, then why didn't that appear on the talking points? Can the White House really have it both ways, that they say, oh, wait a minute, he said act of terror, but a few days later, they take out those references? So they felt pretty confident about it if they sent the president out to say that.
Well, I think they created, through an interagency process, a document that everyone could agree upon. And that's almost by definition in Washington something that is not as specific or as conclusive.
So what they did is acceptable to you?
Well, what they did, I think, was try in a very chaotic situation to come up with points that they felt confident of. They didn't want to go too far in two concepts. One, there are intelligence resources or assets that you might not want to disclose. Second, there's an ongoing investigation was just beginning. Those two factors also framed the response. But I think, again, when you talk about this sort of political dynamic, when the president comes out and says quite quickly, with the authority of his office, this was an act of terror, the notion that we were somehow trying to disguise this and make it something else, I think, falls away very quickly.
Okay, I want to move on quickly to Syria. You heard Senator McCain, and he's been saying it for weeks, that there should be a no-fly zone. Would that really work? Do we really know who these rebels are?
We really don't have a good sense of who's on the ground and the cohesion of elements that we have been trying to support over many months. And a no-fly zone could be feasible from an operational standpoint, but it would, I think, inevitably
what would it accomplish?
Well, might accomplish very little, in fact, because with artillery, you can still fire on innocent civilians and rebels. With armored personnel carriers, you can still move forward, displace troops, and they can go after civilians on the ground. It might not accomplish a great deal, but it would give us a step further to our engagement in a very complicated civil war. I think the best approach is a diplomatic approach at this point. I know it's always sort of, or many times poo-pooed as well, that's just the old sort of diplomacy is not working. But engaging, and Secretary Kerry has been, I think, made a step with the Russians to get them to sit down.
I want to go quickly to the red line. It's been 2 weeks since the United States said there was evidence that the Syrian regime used chemical weapons. We've done nothing. I know they're checking out chain of custody, but this seems like this could go on forever, and we may not do anything. Should the president do something since they appear to have used chemical weapons?
I think we have to take it very seriously. I think we do have to be careful, though, because we've had situations in the past where we've acted on information that was incomplete, impartial, and frankly to the detriment of our country and to our national security. We have to be careful. I think there's several issues here. One
should he have drawn that red line very quickly?
Well, I think, frankly, he should have made it clear, as he did, that the systematic use of chemical weapons against the Syrian people is something the international community cannot tolerate. So that point has to be made. Now the question is, what do you do? You can't do it hastily, but you have to do it very deliberately, and that's what I believe the president is trying to do.
Thanks for joining us this morning, Senator Reid.